People ask me all the time about how I run my virtual machines on my personal desktop. Today we are going to discuss about how I run my virtual machines on my personal desktop. First of all, my personal desktop has a lot of memory. It has 64 gigs RAM. Now, the advantage of running virtual machines on my personal desktop is, first of all, I don't need to pay money. Like say if you have EC2s running on AWS and you forget to shut them down, you might run over and you have to pay a big bill. Running virtual machines on my personal desktop gives me full control of the operating system. I personally can learn a lot of Linux commands because I'm running the whole operating system on my own instead of launching a EC2 which is pre-installed with Amazon Linux or whatever Linux flavor you run. And also I have full control on the memory. For virtual machines, I use Oracle VirtualBox. On the Oracle VirtualBox website, there is a big button for download. So I'm going to click on the download button. This is the downloads page for Oracle VirtualBox software. Since I'm running my VirtualBox on a Windows PC, I can click on Windows host and download the software. As you can see here, I already have my VirtualBox software installed. It is pretty easy to install once you download the installer. I am running a little bit older version, but it is still 7.0. So let's go ahead and create a virtual machine. I'm going to click on this new button to create a new virtual machine. I'm going to install Linux operating system on this virtual machine. Only thing I will change if required is this type. It's already selected as Linux, so I'll leave it like that. But I'm going to change this to other Linux 64-bit. Next thing I want to do is go to hard disk and I will specify the hard disk name as HDD01. You can name your hard disk anything you want, just make sure where it is stored is acceptable for you and you have free space on that disk. I'm going to increase the hard disk size to 80 gigabytes. I'm not going to pre-allocate the size, meaning initially it will be a very small hard disk file virtually created on your hard drive, and then it will grow when it needs to grow automatically. I will just click on finish button here. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to install Linux on this virtual machine. Let's now talk about which flavor of Linux we should be using. In past few years, I was using CentOS Linux, but now I decided to move to Rocky Linux. Let me explain why I'm moving from CentOS to Rocky Linux and why that move is important. CentOS Linux is an open source and free software. CentOS is based on Red Hat Enterprise Linux source code. It was a downstream project, meaning all features of Red Hat Enterprise Linux were released to CentOS within few months of gap. On December 8, 2020, Red Hat announced that the further development of CentOS Linux will be discontinued. In response, Gregory Kutzer, one of the original founders of CentOS, announced that he would start a new project called Rocky Linux to achieve the original goals of CentOS. Rocky Linux name was chosen as a tribute to early CentOS co-founder Rocky McGaw. I'm sorry, I'm sure I have mispronounced both of those names. By December 12th, 2020, the code repository of Rocky Linux had become the top trending repository on GitHub. On December 22nd, 2020, Rocky Linux Community Manager has announced that the target for the initial release was anywhere between March 2021 and May 2021. On 30th April 2021, the first release candidate was officially released for Rocky Linux. On June 4th, 2021, the second release candidate of Rocky Linux version 8.4 was released. On 14th July 2022, Rocky Linux 9.0 was released. The high version number is based on the designation of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Rocky Linux is a clone of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Rocky Linux gets all the features of Red Hat Enterprise Linux after they are tested and adopted in Red Hat Enterprise Linux. This guarantees the stability and performance in Rocky Linux. This is the Rocky Linux website. According to Rocky Linux website, Rocky Linux is an enterprise Linux the community way. Rocky Linux is an open source enterprise operating system designed to be 100% bug for bug compatible with Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Red Hat later announced CentOS Stream. CentOS Stream will get all features which are in development from Red Hat Enterprise Linux, including tested or untested features on regular basis. This makes CentOS Stream unsuitable and unstable for production environments. For a while now, I have been following all these changes and I have recently decided to move from CentOS Linux to Rocky Linux. Now that I have clarified why I am moving from CentOS Linux to Rocky Linux, let's go ahead and download the Rocky Linux software. I will just click on this download button and go to the downloads page. I'm going to install this on a virtual machine which is running x86 architecture. As you can see here, we have a bunch of options to download different ISO files for different options. I'm going to use minimum version of Rocky Linux. So the main reason I want to install the minimum version is it will be a small footprint to download, and then it will be a very small footprint, meaning it needs very little memory to run. First thing in the minimal installation is it doesn't have GUI. What I believe is all the Linux servers we are running in a corporate structure, we don't have GUI running. That makes the Linux operating system quick and stable, and 99% of use cases we do not require a GUI. So I'm going to run my Linux only in a character mode. By just clicking on this minimal option, we can download the minimal ISO file for Rocky Linux. But I'm going to show you an expert mode for downloading these softwares. So let me right click and copy the link. As you can see, this is the copied link from the website for downloading the minimal version of Rocky Linux ISO file. First thing what I'll do, I'll remove the file name from here and just have the directory structure in the URL. And now I'm going to copy paste this URL into the browser, and you can see it brings us to this page. Why I call this as expert option, or why I call this as expert mode, is because now I know exactly what ISOs are published. If you by default click on download on the main web page for download, it will download this file. Instead of clicking on the default minimum download option, I'm going to download this file. Notice that this file was released on 15th December 2022. I will click on this file link and download the file. As you can see here, I am now back on my VirtualBox software. Let me first go to change settings for my VirtualBox. I will now review all the options available for this virtual machine. I will mention if I need to change anything, otherwise I will just scroll through the different windows. I will now look at the system settings. First thing I want to adjust is the memory allocated for this virtual machine. I'm going to make it 2 gigs. Remember that if you install a full version of Rocky Linux including GUI, then 2 gigabytes of memory will be very less. You might have to allocate at least 4 or 8 gigs. I'm going to remove floppy from my boot order and move it down. I just need to boot with a CD and a hard disk. No more changes on this screen. Let me go to the processor tab. I'm going to allocate 2 CPUs. You can just allocate 1 CPU and it should be good enough. No changes on the acceleration tab. No changes on the display tabs. Now in the storage, we have already downloaded our ISO file for minimal install. So I'm going to find the file and select that file. So here is my Rocky Linux minimal ISO, which we downloaded from Rocky Linux website. As you can see here, the downloaded image size is nearly 1.39 gigabytes. No other changes on the storage tab. For my virtual machine, I don't need the audio device, so I'm removing that. For network, I'm going to enable the first adapter and make it a bridged adapter. I want to mention something here. My desktop is connected with wire. It is not running a wireless. Generally, I want to simulate as if I'm working in a data center on a real server. When you have a real server in a data center, that is always connected with a very fast Ethernet or gigabit LAN. You will never see a server in data center running with Wi-Fi. If you want to really simulate and learn at home as if you are sitting in a data center, then I suggest you disable your wireless and have a wired connection for your virtual machine. So just for a quick review, I enabled the first adapter and selected it as bridged adapter. I will now go to the second adapter and enable it and select it as NAT. Later when we start installing the Linux software, I'm going to show you how these two different network adapters will connect to the network. For now, I don't have the adapter 3 and adapter 4, and I'm going to proceed to remaining options. No changes on the serial ports, no changes on the USB, shared folders, or even user interface. I'm just going to click on OK. And now finally we are ready to start installing Rocky Linux on this virtual machine. Now it's time to install our Linux on this virtual machine. So I'll right click on this and start with a normal start. As you can see here, our virtual machine has started and it has come to the Rocky Linux installation page. How it is booting right now is using that ISO file we have plugged in as a CD. By clicking on up arrow key, I know colors are very difficult to see, but I have selected the install Rocky Linux 9.1 option and I will click on enter key. This is the welcome page for installing Rocky Linux. I will just select United States English as a language and continue. I'm going to spend some time going through all these options in detail so that we understand how to install Rocky Linux in an expert mode. I have scrolled down a little bit on this page, and the first thing I would set up is root password under user settings. As you can see here, by default, a root account will be locked. I'm going to provide root password and make sure the account is not locked. Also, I want to make sure we allow the root user to log in using SSH with a password. I'm going to click on Done button to select this root password and continue to the installation screen. After we set up the root password, the next option I will go into is the security profile. Without spending too much time explaining all these options, for our installation, I'm just going to disable the security policy. I will continue by clicking on Done button. Next option I'm going to go to is network and host name options. First thing I'll set up is my server name. After typing the server name or host name, I will click on apply button. As you can see here, when we were creating our virtual machine, we have connected two Ethernet ports. Let's go ahead and configure these ports and make sure we understand all these settings. First, I will select the first Ethernet port. Make sure it is already in a connected mode. Click on configure button. On this screen, I just want to configure two things. I will go to the IPv4 settings tab and make sure it is automatic DHCP. On the IPv6 settings tab, I want to disable IPv6 for this virtual machine for this Ethernet port. So I have selected a method disable under IPv6 settings. Those are the only two changes I want to do on this screen. I will click on save and go back to the previous screen. Now I want you to notice Using this Ethernet port, I am able to connect to my local network, and the IP address assigned to this virtual machine for this particular MAC address is 192.168.1.43. This is a local IP on my local network. Let's now edit the settings for the second network adapter. So I have clicked on the second network adapter. I make sure the adapter is connected, and I will click on the configure button. Again, for this network adapter, I'm going to make sure my IPv4 settings is set to automatic and DHCP. For IPv6 settings, I'm going to again disable IPv6 for this adapter. I will click on save and go back to the previous screen. If you notice, now I have a IP address which is 10.0.3.15. What it is doing is, if you remember, my first network adapter was configured to be bridged adapter, which is getting the local IP on my local network. And if you remember, my second adapter was configured as NAT, and now I am able to get an IP address assigned on the internet. I will click on done and go to the previous page. Next thing I'm going to set up is kdump. We are mostly using this for the local learning purposes. I don't need to capture the kdump in case there is a kernel crash. So I'm going to disable the kdump and go back to the previous page by clicking on done button. The next thing I want to set up is time and date. I'm in New York time zone, so everything looks good here. I just want to make sure the network time is on, and I click on done button and continue. Next thing I'm going to set up is software selection. By default, if you remember, we just downloaded the minimal edition of Rocky Linux, and by default it is going to only install minimal installation. I'm not going to change anything on the screen and just click on done. Next step is to configure where our Rocky Linux will be installed, that is the local hard drive. So I'm going to go to installation destination option. If you remember, we have attached an 80 gig hard drive to our virtual machine. On this screen, that same 80 gig hard drive is selected as a destination for this installation. Under storage configuration, I will select custom option and continue to the next screen by clicking on done. On this screen, we have to create mount points for our Linux installation. I will click on this link which says click here to create them automatically. I'm going to do some modifications to my mount points. First thing, I will select the /home mount point and remove it. Next option is I will click on swap and increase the size for swap. I will change the size to 4 gigs. I will now click on the root mount point and change the size. I will change the root mount point to be 75 gigs in size. I can click on any other mount point to apply this change. Now we have completed changes to the mount points, and I don't have much free space left over. What I did on the screen is I first removed the /home mount point. I increase the swap to be 4 gigs. I then increase the root mount point to be 75 gigs. I'm done with all the changes on this screen, so I'll click on Done and continue to the next screen. This is the summary of all the changes to be done on the hard drive. So Rocky Linux is confirming whether we accept these changes or we can cancel and return to custom partitioning options again. I'm going to accept all the changes and continue. At this point, I want you to notice there is a new option which popped up under user settings called user creation. I'm going to ignore this option for now, and we don't have to change anything else. All I'm going to do is just click on begin installation. It will take some time for Rocky Linux to install on our virtual machine. Remember that we are installing a minimum version of Rocky Linux, so it will be much faster than installing a full version. Okay, Rocky Linux has been installed on our virtual machine. I will click on Reboot System button to restart. As you can see here, our virtual machine has restarted and now we are on a Rocky Linux login prompt. I will now log in as a root user. Using hostname command, I would first capture the IP address assigned to this virtual machine. I'm going to make a note of this IP address. Let us now talk about my favorite option to connect to Linux machines is MobaXterm. I've been using MobaXterm for a very long time. I love this tool. It's a very simple but very futuristic SSH client to connect to our Linux machines. I will now create a new SSH session to connect to our Linux machine. I will select the SSH Secure Shell option. IP address for my virtual machine is 192.168.1.43. I'm going to specify the username and select root for connecting to the machine. I will go to the bookmark settings and also modify the session name here. I will mention that this is my Rocky Linux machine. I will say OK. MobaXterm will go ahead and start a connection using SSH to our Rocky Linux virtual machine. As you can see here, using MobaXterm, I am now connected to the virtual machine and logged in as root user on Returnal server. As you can see here, we have successfully installed Rocky Linux release 9.1 codenamed Blue Onyx on this virtual machine. Remember that we have installed a minimal version of Rocky Linux. So let's verify how much memory it is occupying right now. As you can see here, Rocky Linux virtual machine is just occupying about 307 megabytes. Since we installed the minimal version of Rocky Linux, we need to install some very important packages which are not installed right now. Notice that I am logged in as root user on my Returnal server. In the past versions of Linux, we used to use yum for installing packages. Couple of versions before on Linux, there is a new package manager called DNF. We will now see how to use DNF to check for a missing package. Using DNF command, I have just listed all the installed packages which match with zip. As you can see here, we have bzip2 libraries and gzip package. Let's say we want to find if there is a package called zip available for us to install. Using this DNF search command, I have searched for a zip package in the Rocky Linux repository. It found one package called zip.x86_64. Using this DNF command, I'm going to install the zip package, and also I'm passing a parameter called assume s, meaning when it is ready for installing the zip package, it is not going to confirm whether I want to install it or not. Let's go ahead and install this package now. Let us verify if the zip package got installed properly. Now you can see there are two new entries called zip and unzip. This is how we can use DNF instead of yum to install new packages or missing packages on our Linux machine. These are all the list of packages I generally install on my freshly installed Linux box. NetTools package gives us some network related tools like ifconfig command. wget, tar, telnet, bind utilities and tree are all common utilities we need. When we want to work with Git repositories, we need git-all package. I am also installing python-pip. Between Java 11 and Java 1.8, I am choosing to install Java 1.8 OpenJDK on this machine. We already installed the zip package, so it is just going to ignore that command and proceed. Using this sed command, I am disabling the security enhanced Linux. Since the beginning of Linux 9, we also need to run one extra command called grubby to update the kernel and disable security enhanced Linux. I'm using the systemctl command to disable the firewall which is running on our Linux box. Finally, I'm restarting my box using the init command. I will now run all these commands on my Returnal server. As you can see here, putting all these commands into a shell file, I have created an executable script. I'm now running this script to install all the missing packages we need to install. As you can see here, it has completed running the script and restarted our server. Let us now try to reconnect to our virtual machine. Now that we have completed installing all the required packages which were missing earlier due to the minimal installation, now I'm going to go ahead and verify few settings. First thing I want to verify is the Security Enhanced Linux status. Using a set command and a grubby command, we have disabled this before the restart. As you can see here, SELinux status has been disabled. That means Security Enhanced Linux has been disabled on this server. Using the systemctl command, I am verifying the status of the firewalld. As you can see, the firewalld or firewall daemon has been disabled on this box. As you can see here, we have Python version 3.9.14 already on this box. This is the pip version which got installed. As you can see here, we have installed OpenJDK version 1.8.0 build 352. With this, we have completed installing all the required packages on our Rocky Linux. Notice that I have logged in as root user, and using this dnf update command, I can update the entire system packages if any of the updates are missing. We have now completed updating our system packages. We can run the same update command again to verify if there are any pending updates available. As you can see here, there are no more updates to install on this system. We can run this dnf update command frequently to keep our Linux operating system up to date. I have also noticed that when we are installing any updates, it will download some temporary files and it will fill up the temp space. Using this dnf command, any temporary files which were already existing can be cleaned. As you can see here, dnf clean command has removed 32 files which are no longer required. And I have executed the clean command one more time and this time it found 0 files to be removed. At this point, we have completed installing Rocky Linux on our virtual machine. Next step is to customize our network adapters. You have to understand that some of these options are expert mode only, and you might not have to do all these steps on your virtual machine at home. I always love to document all these advanced options. Somewhere between Linux 7 and Linux 9, the way Linux names these devices have changed. Notice that our network adapters are named as ENP0S3 and ENP0S8. These were automatically assigned by the device manager. On the newer versions of Linux, if we have to add a new network adapter or a new device, it is not guaranteed that system will keep these device names consistent after a restart. Generally, for Cassandra-like softwares, I would like to keep these device names consistent across the restarts of the systems because we bind them with listen interface and RPC interface in Cassandra. First thing we will do is use this IP link show command to get the information about Ethernet adapters. As you can see here, I have copied the output of IP link show command and put it on an editor. So first thing I will do, ignoring the loopback adapter, the two network adapters we have, ENP0S3 and ENP0S8, I will capture their MAC addresses. This is the MAC address for ENP0S3 network adapter. This is the MAC address for ENP0S8 network adapter. I'm going to now paste this MAC address in this ATTR address area in between the double quotes. Let me take the second MAC address and put it on the second line, and I will explain you what we have to do next. As you can see here, I have copy pasted all the details required into these two rows. The first line is binding with this MAC address to a new name called ETH0. Essentially, I'm going to rename my ENP0S3 network adapter to ETH0. I'm now binding the second MAC address, which belongs to ENP0S8 network adapter, and the new name given to it is ETH1. I'm going to now create a new file on our Linux box, and the file is etc udev rulesd 70-custom ifnames.rules. This is the file I'm going to create. In this file, I have pasted those two entries we built earlier. So just to review, step 1, I gathered all the MAC addresses related to my network adapters. Second step, I created a new custom ifnames rules file for our network adapters. At this point, I'm going to restart my Linux server. My Linux server has restarted. Let's try to reconnect. As you can see here, my Returnal server has restarted and I have logged back in as root user. Using this Network Manager CLI command, nmcli, I am listing all the devices connected to our server right now. If you notice, now our devices are called ETH0 and ETH1. As you can see here, ENP0S3 and ENP0S8 are existing, but they are not having a device name assigned. Also notice that when using ifconfig command, now my Ethernet network ports are called as ETH0 and ETH1. Right now we are using DHCP for assigning IP addresses. Imagine we want to set up static IPs for our server. We can achieve that using a tool called nmtui. I'm going to now launch nmtui so that we can change the network settings and configure the static IPs. This is how the Network Manager TUI looks like. I'm going to select Edit a Connection option. First thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to delete these ENP0S3 and ENP0S8 configurations. Now I'm going to select Wired Connection 1 and edit it. As you can see, this is ETH0, so I will change the profile name also to ETH0. Next thing I will do is change the IPv4 configuration from automatic to manual. This allows us to set up a static IP for the ETH0. By going to addresses option, I'm going to type the static IP address for ETH0. I have to assign a gateway and that will be my router address. I don't have to change any other options here, so I'm going to hide all the settings now. For IPv6, I'm going to change from automatic to disabled. Essentially, we are disabling IPv6 configuration for ETH0. I'm not changing any other options, just going to OK. As you can see here, wired connection 1 has now been renamed to ETH0. Let's now change the settings for wired connection 2. Wired connection 2 should be named as ETH1. I'm going to leave IPv4 configuration to be automatic, which is based on DHCP. But I'm going to change the IPv6 configuration to disabled. Again, we are disabling the IPv6 for the ETH1 network adapter. I don't need to do any other changes on this screen, so I'll just say OK. And you can now see we have ETH0 and ETH1. I'm done with all the changes. I'm going to click on back. And also, if you need to change your system host name, you can do it from here. Right now, all our changes are done. So I'm going to quit from this Network Manager TUI. I want you to notice that all the configuration changes we have done so far for our Ethernet adapters or network adapters are stored in these two files. Let us now review each of these files. As you can see here, this is the configuration file for ETH0 network adapter. We have assigned a static IP to the ETH0, so method has been set to manual. For IPv6, method has been disabled. This is the configuration file for ETH1 network adapter. As you can see here, IPv4 method has been set to auto, that means it is DHCP, and IPv6 has been disabled. Now we will finally restart our server one last time. Our returnal server has restarted. But remember that we have now assigned a new static IP to the server, so we have to change our MobaXterm SSH configuration. I have now specified the new IP address for our returnal server. I will now start the SSH connection to the server, and I will say yes, remote host identification has changed, but I am aware of that. You accept the changes now. I am now logged back in as root user on our returnal server. We have now completed all the changes required for custom network adapter names. Also, using nmtui tool, we have verified how to set up static IPs. As you know, most of my work these days is on Apache Cassandra. So, I need to create one Apache Cassandra user on this server. When logged in as root user, using these commands, I'm going to set up my Cassandra user. I'm going to create a home folder for Cassandra user. Using user add and user mod commands, I'm creating a Cassandra user and will also assign a home folder. I'm going to set up the initial password for the Cassandra user, and the password I'm choosing here is AstraDB. Using these chown and chmod commands, I'm setting up the proper permissions on the home folder for Cassandra user. I will now run all these commands as root user on our returnal server. Cassandra user has been created now. Using this command, I will become Cassandra user on this server. First thing I want to modify is the bash profile. These are the standard entries in the bash profile for Cassandra user. I'm going to exit from this server. As you can see here, I have successfully logged in as Cassandra user on my returnal server.